Stop everything you're doing right now. Because what I'm about to tell you is the single most dramatic collapse in women's basketball negotiation history. And at the center of it all, Breanna Stewart, two-time champion, MVP, the supposed face of the WNBA's future. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. She just handed the league exactly what they wanted, on a silver platter. I'm going to break this down piece by piece, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how the most powerful players in women's basketball walked into a trap of their own making. Let's rewind for just a second. 4 months, WNBA players have been demanding what they call fair compensation. Higher salaries, better revenue sharing, more respect. And honestly, they had a case, a legitimate one. The league is growing. Viewership is exploding. Caitlin Clark just shattered every conceivable metric for audience engagement. The WNBA was sitting on a gold mine, so the players pushed. They pushed hard. They wanted to renegotiate their collective bargaining agreement early. They wanted the NBA's involvement to translate into NBA-level pay. And for a while, it looked like they had momentum. But then something happened. Something that changed everything. You see, while the players were making noise, making demands, and rallying public support, the league was quietly preparing a counterstrike so calculated, so brilliantly timed, that most people didn't even recognize it for what it was. Until yesterday. Yesterday, in the middle of what everyone thought was a moratorium, a dead zone where nothing significant happens, the WNBA dropped a bomb. They started issuing qualifying offers to free agents. Now, if you're not deep into basketball business, that might not sound like much. But trust me when I tell you, this was a declaration of war. Here's why. Those qualifying offers, they weren't based on the new deal the players were demanding. They were locked into the current CBA, the old terms, the lower salaries, the exact figures the players spent months publicly rejecting. The league wasn't asking for signatures immediately. No, that's not what made this so devastating. What made this so devastating was the message. The NBA and WNBA were essentially saying, here's your reality check. Here's what you're actually worth under the current agreement. Take it or leave it. And suddenly, the players' leverage? It started evaporating. Because now, every single free agent has a number in front of them. A concrete, undeniable number. And that number is nowhere close to what they've been fighting for. But the real story isn't just about the league's chess move. No. The real story is about the chaos happening behind closed doors within the players' own ranks. Because while the WNBA was executing precision strategy, the players' union was drowning in something far more destructive than external pressure. They were drowning in conflict of interest. Breanna Stewart, Nafisa Collier, two of the biggest stars in women's basketball, co-founders and co-owners of Unrivaled, a competing basketball league designed to give WNBA players off-season opportunities. And here's where it gets absolutely insane. These same women? They hold executive positions within the WNBA Players Association, the very union negotiating with the league. Think about that for a moment. The people advising WNBA players on their collective bargaining strategy are simultaneously running a rival league that directly benefits from WNBA instability. Every time the WNBA looks bad, Unrivaled looks better. Every time negotiations stall, Unrivaled becomes more attractive. Every time players feel undervalued, Unrivaled positions itself as the alternative. Do you see the problem here? How can you trust the strategic advice of someone who financially benefits from the very chaos they're supposedly helping you navigate? The answer is, you can't. And the league knew it. The WNBA front office didn't just outmaneuver the players. They exposed a fracture that had been growing for months. And now, that fracture is about to become an earthquake. See, when you're negotiating against a billion-dollar entity backed by the most powerful basketball league on the planet, you need one thing above everything else. Unity. Absolute. Unbreakable. Unity. One voice. One message. One strategy. But the WNBA players? They walked into this fight already divided, already compromised, already weakened by internal contradictions that the league could smell from a mile away. And the qualifying offers yesterday? That was the league calling their bluff. Here's what most people don't understand about negotiation at this level. It's not just about what you demand. It's about what you're willing to walk away from. It's about credibility. It's about the other side believing, truly believing, that you'll burn the whole thing down before you accept less than you deserve. The WNBA players talked a big game. They made public statements. They gave interviews. They rallied fans on social media. But when push came to shove, they blinked. Not all of them. But enough. Enough to send a signal. Enough to reveal cracks in the foundation. And Breanna Stewart, the woman who was supposed to lead this charge, supposed to be the face of player empowerment, supposed to unite every star in the league behind a common cause, found herself in an impossible position. Because how do you lead a union when your business interests directly conflict with the people you're supposed to represent? How do you demand maximum value for WNBA players when a weaker WNBA makes your alternative league more valuable? How do you negotiate in good faith when every delay, every frustration, every breakdown in talks puts more money in your pocket? You can't. And the players are starting to realize it. Whispers are circulating. Names are being named. Trust is eroding faster than anyone anticipated. Some players are asking uncomfortable questions. Questions like, why are we listening to strategic advice from people who own a competing league? Questions like, whose interests are really being served here? Questions like, did we just get played? And the answers aren't pretty. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Because the qualifying offers weren't just a negotiation tactic. They weren't just a power play. They were a timer. The league essentially started a countdown. Players now have a limited window to respond. A limited window to decide their futures under terms they publicly said they would never accept. And some of them, they're going to have to accept. Not because they want to. Not because they agree with the terms. But because they have no other choice. See, not every WNBA player is Breanna Stewart. Not every player has unrivaled money. Not every player has endorsement deals and alternative income streams. For many of these women, the WNBA isn't a side hustle. It's their entire livelihood. And when you're staring at a qualifying offer, even a low one, and the alternative is unemployment, principles start feeling like luxuries you can't afford. That's the brutal math the league was counting on. They knew the superstars could hold out. They knew the big names could afford to wait. But they also knew something else. They knew the rank-and-file players, the role players, the bench players, the women fighting for roster spots, couldn't afford the same patience. And when those players start breaking ranks, when they start accepting offers, when the solidarity crumbles from the bottom up, the superstars lose their leverage entirely. This is classic divide and conquer. Textbook. Ruthless. Effective. And the WNBA just executed it flawlessly. But the real question isn't about what the league did. The real question is about what happens next. Because Breanna Stewart just made a decision that might define her legacy, for better or worse. And you're not going to believe what she said. Breanna Stewart stepped up to a microphone 48 hours ago. And what came out of her mouth sent shockwaves through the entire women's basketball world. She didn't back down. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge any conflict of interest. Instead, she doubled down. We built Unrivaled because the WNBA wasn't giving players what they deserve, she said. That's not a conflict. That's proof we understand exactly what players need. The audacity was breathtaking. She essentially argued that owning a competing league made her more qualified to negotiate for WNBA players. Not less. And for a brief moment, some people bought it. Social media lit up with supporters. Fans praised her boldness. Commentators called it a power move. But behind closed doors, the reaction was very, very different. Sources close to several WNBA players tell a different story. A story of frustration, confusion, growing resentment. Because here's the thing about leadership. It's not just about what you say publicly. It's about what people believe privately. And privately, trust is collapsing. One anonymous player, a veteran with over a decade in the league, put it bluntly in a conversation that's been making its way through basketball circles. How am I supposed to trust someone who literally profits when my situation gets worse? Unrivaled exists because the WNBA supposedly undervalues us. So what happens if we get what we want? What happens if the WNBA starts paying us fairly? Doesn't that make her league pointless? That's the contradiction nobody wants to address publicly. If the WNBA dramatically improves player compensation, travel conditions, and revenue sharing, what's the selling point of Unrivaled? The entire premise of that league is built on WNBA failure, on WNBA inadequacy, on the idea that players need something more. So how can the person who built that alternative genuinely want the WNBA to succeed? The math doesn't add up. The incentives don't align. The conflict is structural, fundamental, and unavoidable. And the league knows it. Which brings us to the next devastating move. While Breanna Stewart was defending herself publicly, while the media was chewing on her sound bites, the WNBA quietly did something that barely made headlines. They extended the qualifying offer deadline. Wait, what? Doesn't that help the players? Doesn't more time benefit the union? On the surface, yes. More time seems like a concession, a goodwill gesture, a sign of flexibility. But think deeper. What does more time actually mean in this context? It means more time for doubt to spread. More time for players to have private conversations questioning their leadership. More time for the financial pressure to mount on players who can't afford to wait. More time for division. The league isn't giving players room to breathe. They're giving cracks room to widen. Every extra day without a deal is another day of uncertainty. Another day of anxious phone calls between agents and players. Another day of teammates looking at each other wondering who's going to break first. It's psychological warfare disguised as generosity. And it's working. Reports are emerging that at least 6 mid-tier free agents have already privately indicated they'll accept qualifying offers if a new CBA isn't reached within weeks. 6 players doesn't sound like much, but it's a domino effect waiting to happen. Because the moment one player signs, others will follow. The fear of being left without a chair when the music stops is overwhelming. And the stars? The superstars who can afford to wait? They'll be standing alone. Their leverage gone. Their solidarity exposed as an illusion. This is how empires crumble. Not with a bang. With a slow, steady erosion of faith. But here's what nobody is talking about yet. The role of the NBA in all of this. Because the NBA isn't just backing the WNBA financially. They're not just providing resources. They're providing strategy. Playbooks refined over decades of brutal labor negotiations. And there's one particular tactic they've perfected that's about to change everything. The NBA has been through this before. Multiple times. Lockouts, strikes, bitter negotiations that dragged on for months. Public battles that threatened to destroy the league. And every single time, the owners came out on top. Not because the players were wrong. Not because their demands were unreasonable. But because the owners understood something fundamental about labor disputes. The side that can wait longer, wins. It's brutal. It's unfair. It's reality. And right now, the WNBA is applying that exact playbook with surgical precision. Here's what most fans don't realize about the NBA's history with player negotiations. In 2011, the NBA locked out its players for 161 days. Over 5 months of no basketball. No paychecks. No security. The players held strong initially. They refused to budge. They made public statements about solidarity and sacrifice. But as the weeks turned into months, cracks appeared. Players with families started worrying. Players with mortgages started sweating. Players without massive endorsement deals started panicking. And eventually, they folded. The final deal heavily favored the owners. The players got some concessions, sure. But the fundamental power structure? Unchanged. The NBA learned something invaluable from that experience. Time is the ultimate weapon. Not arguments. Not public opinion. Not moral high ground. Time. Because owners can survive without games. They have other investments. Other income streams. Other businesses. Players? Most players have one skill. One career. One window to earn. And that window is short. Brutally short. The average WNBA career lasts approximately 5 years. 5 years to earn. 5 years to secure your future. 5 years before your body gives out or younger talent pushes you aside. Every day spent in limbo is a day stolen from that window. The league knows this, and they're exploiting it mercilessly. But here's where the WNBA situation gets even more complicated than anything the NBA ever faced. The NBA players, despite their differences during negotiations, didn't have leadership actively running competing businesses. The WNBA does. And that conflict isn't theoretical anymore. It's becoming operational. Here's what I mean. Unrivaled is gearing up for its next season. Rosters need to be finalized. Schedules need to be set. Marketing campaigns need players committed and available. And guess what happens if the WNBA CBA negotiations drag on? If free agency remains in chaos? If players don't know where they'll be playing? Unrivaled becomes more attractive, more stable, more appealing. Players looking at uncertainty in the WNBA will look at Unrivaled and think, at least I know what I'm getting there. So every day the WNBA negotiations remain unresolved is a recruitment opportunity for Breanna Stewart's league. Do you understand how insidious this is? The person helping guide WNBA players through these negotiations has a direct financial incentive for those negotiations to fail. Not openly fail. Not dramatically collapse. Just drag on. Stay messy. Keep players anxious and uncertain. That uncertainty drives them toward alternatives. Alternatives she just happens to own. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is basic business logic. And players are starting to connect the dots. One source close to a prominent WNBA team described the locker room atmosphere as toxic with suspicion. "Nobody knows who to trust anymore," she said. "We're supposed to be fighting the league together. But half of us are wondering if our own leadership wants us to lose." That kind of doubt is poison. Absolute poison. Because collective action requires collective trust. Without trust, there is no solidarity. Without solidarity, there is no power. And without power, players take whatever deal is offered. Which brings us to what happened behind closed doors just 72 hours ago. A meeting was called. Emergency session. Player representatives only. What was said in that room has been kept tightly under wraps. Until now. Because what leaked out of that meeting changes everything we thought we knew about this situation. The meeting lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of raised voices. 4 hours of accusations. 4 hours of the most heated internal conflict the WNBA Players Association has ever experienced. And when it was over, nothing would be the same. Here's what we know. The meeting was called by a group of veteran players. Not superstars. Not media darlings. Veterans. Women who've spent years grinding in this league. Women who've seen promises made and broken. Women who've watched younger stars rise while their own salaries barely moved. And they had one demand. They wanted Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier to recuse themselves from all CBA negotiations immediately. Not step back. Not reduce their involvement. Completely remove themselves. The room reportedly erupted. Supporters of Stewart argued she was being unfairly targeted. That her business ventures were separate from her union responsibilities. That attacking her was attacking the progress she'd helped create. But the veterans weren't backing down. One player, whose identity remains protected, reportedly stood up and delivered a speech that silenced the room. "We're not attacking Breanna the player," she said. "We're questioning Breanna the business owner. Because right now those two people have different goals. And we can't afford to pretend otherwise." She continued. "Every single one of us in this room is fighting for the same thing. Better pay. Better conditions. A real future in this league. But some of us don't have backup plans. Some of us don't have ownership stakes in other leagues. Some of us need this deal to work. And we need to know that the people leading us want it to work too." The silence that followed was deafening. Because she had articulated what dozens of players had been thinking but were too afraid to say. This wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about tearing down successful women. It was about basic, fundamental alignment of interests. When your leaders have escape routes you don't have, how hard will they really fight for your future? The meeting ended without resolution. No vote was taken. No formal action decided. But the damage was done. The unity that players had projected publicly shattered behind closed doors. And somehow, the league found out. Within 24 hours of that meeting, the WNBA made another calculated move. They leaked salary comparisons. Not officially, of course. Nothing traceable back to the front office. Just anonymous documents finding their way to sports reporters. Spreadsheets showing what WNBA players currently make versus what they're demanding versus what the league claims it can afford. The numbers were damning. According to the leaked documents, the players' demands would require the WNBA to operate at a significant loss for at least 3 years. The league's proposal, while lower than what players wanted, was framed as the maximum sustainable increase. Now, are those numbers accurate? That's debatable. The WNBA has historically been opaque about its finances. The NBA's involvement has pumped significant resources into the league. Sponsorship deals are growing. Media rights are becoming more valuable. But accuracy wasn't the point. Perception was. Suddenly, casual fans, people who'd been vaguely supportive of player demands, started questioning whether those demands were realistic. Social media shifted. The narrative changed. Players went from underpaid heroes to entitled complainers in the span of 48 hours. And Stewart? Her response made everything worse. Instead of addressing the financial arguments directly, she posted a photo from an Unrivaled practice facility. Caption, "Building something special. Players first. Always." The implication was clear. If the WNBA won't pay fairly, there's somewhere else that will. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Because it looked like a threat. It looked like abandonment. It looked like the leader of the players' union was advertising an exit while her members were still fighting for survival. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Former WNBA players spoke out. Current players went silent, which said everything. Even fans who'd supported Stewart started questioning her judgment. And then, someone made a decision that changed the entire trajectory of this story. A decision that nobody saw coming. A decision that put the WNBA on a collision course with something far bigger than a labor dispute. Her name doesn't matter. Not yet. What matters is what she did. A mid-level player. 8-year veteran. Never made an all-star team. Never landed a signature shoe deal. Never had her face on a billboard. But she had something more valuable than fame. She had courage. And 72 hours ago, she became the first WNBA player to publicly accept a qualifying offer under the current CBA terms. The reaction was nuclear. Social media exploded. Teammates who'd stood beside her for years suddenly unfollowed her. Group chats went silent. The sisterhood that WNBA players constantly celebrated? Gone in an instant. She was called a traitor. A sellout. A scab. One prominent basketball commentator said she stabbed every woman in the league in the back for a paycheck. But here's what those critics conveniently ignored. She had 2 kids, a mortgage, medical bills from a knee surgery the previous season, no endorsement deals, no overseas contracts waiting, no unrivaled ownership stake to fall back on. For her, the qualifying offer wasn't a betrayal, it was survival. And she absolutely knew, that she wasn't alone. In a statement released through her agent, she said something that cut straight to the heart of this conflict. I believe in fair pay. I believe in everything we've been fighting for. But I also believe in feeding my family. I waited as long as I could. I trusted our leadership to get a deal done. And when that didn't happen, I made the only choice I had left. Then came the line that shook the foundation of the players' union. I hope the women leading these negotiations understand that not everyone has the same options they do. She didn't name Breanna Stewart. She didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. Within hours of that statement, 3 more players quietly indicated they would accept their qualifying offers. Then 5 more. Then rumors of a dozen others considering the same path. The dam was breaking. And the WNBA? They responded with perfect, devastating timing. Commissioner Kathy Engelberg released a statement praising the players who had chosen stability and partnership over uncertainty. She emphasized the league's commitment to growth. She highlighted record attendance numbers. She pointed to increased media coverage and expanding sponsorship deals. And then she said something that landed like a bomb. We remain hopeful that all players will recognize the value of working together within our current framework while we continue discussions about the future. The WNBA is not the enemy of its players. We are partners. Partners. That word hit differently now. Because partners don't issue ultimatums disguised as qualifying offers. Partners don't leak financial documents to shift public opinion. Partners don't exploit internal divisions to break solidarity. But there was something else in that statement. Something hidden between the carefully chosen words. A signal. The phrase, within our current framework, wasn't accidental. It was a message to every player still holding out. Accept the terms we're offering. Or watch your leverage disappear completely. And for many players, the message was received loud and clear. The trickle of acceptances became a stream. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because while rank-and-file players were scrambling to secure their futures, the superstars were planning something else entirely. A countermove. A desperate high-risk gamble that could either save the negotiations, or destroy them forever. And at the center of this plan was someone nobody expected. Not Breanna Stewart. Not Nafisa Collier. Not any of the usual names that dominate WNBA headlines. This player had stayed silent throughout the entire conflict. Hadn't given interviews. Hadn't posted on social media. Hadn't taken sides publicly. But behind the scenes, she'd been making calls, building alliances, preparing for this exact moment. And what she was about to propose would force every player in the league to make an impossible choice. A'ja Wilson. The name carries weight. Serious weight. 2-time MVP. Olympic gold medalist. Defensive Player of the Year. The most dominant force in women's basketball not named Caitlin Clark. And unlike Stewart, she had kept her hands clean. No competing league ownership. No controversial business entanglements. No public statements that could be twisted or weaponized. Just dominance on the court and silence off it. That silence? It was strategic. Because while everyone else was fighting publicly, A'ja was watching, learning, calculating. She saw the conflict of interest accusations destroy trust. She saw the qualifying offers fracture solidarity. She saw the league exploit every crack, every weakness, every mistake. And she saw an opportunity. 3 days ago, Aya Wilson called an unofficial meeting. Not through union channels. Not with leadership approval. Just a group text to 15 of the league's biggest names. My place. Tomorrow night. No phones. No agents. No media. Just us. 14 players showed up. Breanna Stewart was not invited. That absence spoke volumes. What happened in that room has been pieced together through multiple sources. The details are still emerging. But the core of what was discussed is now clear. Aya proposed something radical. A shadow negotiation. A separate track. A parallel conversation with the league. Completely independent of the official union leadership. The idea was simple but explosive. If the current leadership was compromised, whether intentionally or structurally, why continue following their strategy? Why trust a negotiation led by people with obvious conflicts of interest? Instead, form a new coalition. The 15 most marketable, most valuable players in the league. The faces of franchises. The reason fans buy tickets and networks pay for broadcast rights. And approach the league directly. We represent 80% of the WNBA's star power, Aya reportedly said. Without us, there is no league. Without us, there are no record ratings. Without us, Caitlin Clark is playing in empty arenas. We are the leverage. So let's use it. The room was electric. For months, players had felt powerless. Caught between a league that was outmaneuvering them and leadership they couldn't fully trust. Aya was offering a third option. Take control. But there was a massive risk. Going around the official union could be seen as betrayal. It could trigger legal complications. It could fracture the player community even further. And if the league refused to engage? If they exposed the shadow negotiation publicly? The players involved would look desperate. Divided. The debate lasted hours. Some players were immediately on board. The frustration with Stewart's leadership had been building for months. This felt like liberation. Others hesitated. The union existed for a reason. Going rogue could set dangerous precedents. What happens next time there's a conflict? Does every faction just negotiate separately? But ultimately, the room reached a consensus. They would give official leadership one more chance. 1 week to show meaningful progress. 1 week to address the conflict of interest concerns. 1 week to prove they could deliver a deal. If nothing changed, they would move forward with Aya's plan. The clock started ticking. And somehow, through a leak, a careless text, a betrayal, word of this meeting reached Breanna Stewart within 48 hours. Her reaction was immediate. She requested an emergency meeting with the full Players Association Executive Committee. Called it for the following morning. Mandatory attendance. And what happened in that meeting would determine the future of every player in the league. But here's what nobody anticipated. The league was listening too. Not metaphorically. Not through rumors or speculation. Literally listening. Because someone in that room of 15 players was feeding information directly to the WNBA front office. A traitor. Someone who had decided their individual interests outweighed collective solidarity. And the league was about to use that intelligence in the most devastating way possible. The Emergency Executive Committee meeting started at 9 a.m. By 9:47 a.m., it was already falling apart. Breanna Stewart walked into that room prepared. She had notes. She had talking points. She had a carefully rehearsed speech designed to reassert her authority and address the whispers that had been circulating for weeks. But she never got the chance to deliver it. Because before she could speak, her phone buzzed. Then another phone buzzed. Then another. Then every phone in the room. ESPN had just dropped a bombshell report. WNBA players in chaos. Secret meeting reveals deep divisions, shadow negotiations planned. The article was detailed. Disturbingly detailed. It named Aya Wilson as the organizer. It listed several players who had attended. It quoted, allegedly directly quoted, statements made in what was supposed to be a completely private conversation. And it painted a picture of a players' union in complete disarray. The source? Anonymous, but clearly someone who had been in that room. The timing was surgical. Designed for maximum damage. Because now, instead of addressing her conflict of interest, Stewart was standing in a room where everyone was looking at each other with suspicion. Who leaked? Who betrayed us? Who's working with the league? Trust, whatever remained of it, evaporated instantly. Stewart tried to regain control. Tried to focus on the real enemy. Tried to remind everyone that the league was the opposition, not each other. But it was too late. The damage was done. Players started leaving the meeting. Some in anger, some in tears, some in stunned silence. By noon, social media was a war zone. Current players were subtweeting each other. Former players were weighing in with takes that ranged from sympathetic to savage. Fans were choosing sides. Media outlets were running panel discussions analyzing every angle. And the WNBA? Complete silence. That silence was intentional, calculated, devastating. Because by saying nothing, the league let the players destroy themselves. Every tweet, every accusation, every public spat between teammates reinforced the narrative that these players couldn't get their act together. If they can't even agree among themselves, how can they negotiate a complex labor deal? That's what casual observers started thinking. That's what corporate sponsors started worrying about. That's what network executives started factoring into future calculations. The players weren't just losing the negotiation anymore. They were losing the narrative. And in modern sports, narrative is everything. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. The mole, whoever they were, didn't just leak information about the shadow negotiation. They leaked something else. Private financial information about individual players. Tax situations, debt levels, contract details that were supposed to be confidential. Suddenly, the public knew which players were financially vulnerable, which players couldn't afford to hold out, which players were one missed paycheck away from serious trouble. The weaponization of this information was immediate. Sports talk shows started speculating about which players would crack next. Fantasy-style rankings emerged predicting the order players would accept qualifying offers. These women weren't being treated as professionals fighting for fair compensation. They were being treated as contestants in some twisted reality show. And the psychological toll? Immeasurable. One player, her identity protected, reportedly broke down during a team meeting. "They know everything about me now," she said. "My finances, my struggles, things I never wanted anyone to know. And someone I trusted gave it to them. Someone in this room." That's the moment the fight stopped being about money. It became about survival, about dignity, about whether this league, this community, could ever be repaired. And somewhere in the chaos, one person saw an opening. Not Stewart, not Aya Wilson, not anyone currently wearing a WNBA jersey. Someone from outside the league entirely. Someone with resources, with connections, with a vision for women's basketball that didn't include the current power structure. And they were about to make an offer that would change everything. The call came at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Aya Wilson was home, exhausted, defeated, scrolling through the endless nightmare that her social media mentions had become. The number was blocked. She almost didn't answer, but something told her to pick up. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, instantly recognizable. It was one of the most powerful women in American business, a billionaire, a media mogul, someone whose name alone opens doors that remain permanently closed to everyone else. For legal reasons, we can't reveal her identity. Not yet. The situation is still developing. But what she said to Aya Wilson that night has been partially confirmed by multiple sources. "I've been watching what's happening to you, to all of you, and I think you deserve better options." I was silent, suspicious. After the leaks, after the betrayals, trust was a foreign concept. But the woman continued. "I'm not interested in buying a WNBA team. I'm not interested in sponsoring players for endorsement deals. I'm interested in something much bigger." She paused. "I want to build a new league, a real competitor, not a side project like Unrivaled, not an off-season distraction. A full-scale, primary professional women's basketball league with salary structures that match your actual market value." Aya's breath caught. "I have the capital. I have the broadcast relationships. I have the infrastructure. What I need is credibility, star power, players willing to take a leap. I'm calling you first because you've stayed clean through all of this. No conflicts, no compromises. You're the face I want for this project." The offer was staggering. A guaranteed 5-year contract worth more than Aya would make in 15 years in the WNBA. Equity stake in the new league. Creative control over marketing and branding. Full medical coverage extending 10 years beyond retirement. And one more thing. I want you to recruit. Bring 10 players of your choosing. Each of them gets similar terms. We announce next month. First season tips off in 18 months. The room was spinning. This wasn't just a contract offer. This was a revolution. A chance to bypass the WNBA entirely. To render their qualifying offers meaningless. To make the entire CBA negotiation irrelevant. Why fight for crumbs when someone's offering the whole bakery? But Aya didn't say yes. Not immediately. Because she understood something the billionaire might not have fully considered. Leaving the WNBA wasn't just a business decision. It was personal. These were her teammates, her competitors, her community, women she'd battled against and celebrated with for years. Walking away meant abandoning them. Meant leaving the players without star power to leverage. Meant potentially destroying the league that had given her everything. Could she live with that? And there was another question. A darker one. What if this offer was too good to be true? What if it was a setup? A test? Some elaborate scheme to expose her as disloyal and finish destroying the players' unity? After everything that had happened, the leaks, the mole, the manufactured chaos, paranoia wasn't just reasonable. It was necessary. I need time, Aya said. You have 1 week, the woman replied. After that, I move to my second choice. And you become just another player who missed her moment. The line went dead. Aya sat alone in her living room, phone in hand, heart pounding. 1 week to make a decision that would reshape women's basketball forever. 1 week to choose between loyalty and liberation. 1 week to determine whether the WNBA would survive or burn. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did several other players. Because Aya wasn't the only one who received a call. The billionaire had made a list. 10 players. 10 phone calls. 10 identical offers. And not everyone had asked for time to think. Some had already said yes. By Friday morning, 4 players had accepted the billionaire's offer. 4 of the biggest names in women's basketball. 4 franchise cornerstones. 4 faces that casual fans actually recognized. They hadn't gone public yet. They'd signed NDAs. The announcement was scheduled for exactly 30 days out. But secrets that explosive? They don't stay secret. By Friday afternoon, whispers were circulating. Agents were getting nervous calls from WNBA teams. Front offices were scrambling to verify rumors they desperately hoped weren't true. By Friday evening, the WNBA made an emergency decision. They ended the moratorium. Immediately. Not in a week. Not after more negotiations. Right now. And they didn't just end it. They sweetened every single qualifying offer on the table. Across the board, 15% increases. Improved revenue sharing language. Enhanced benefits packages. Concessions the players had been demanding for months. Not everything they wanted, but significantly more than what had been offered before. The message was clear and desperate. Please don't leave. We'll pay more. We'll do better. Just don't burn this down. For the players still holding qualifying offers, it was a lifeline. For the 4 who'd already accepted the billionaire's deal, it was devastating timing. Because now they had to choose between 2 futures. The WNBA, flawed, complicated, but real and established, was finally moving in the right direction. Or the new league, untested, uncertain, but promising wealth beyond anything they'd imagined. Aya Wilson called another meeting. Emergency. The same 15 players from before. But this time different energy, different stakes. Because this wasn't about negotiating anymore. This was about identity. About what women's basketball would become. About whether they'd stay and fight to fix what was broken, or walk away and build something new. The room split down the middle. 7 players wanted to stay. Fight for the improved WNBA terms. Build on the momentum of growing viewership and cultural relevance. 7 wanted to leave. Take the money. Bet on themselves and a new vision. Aya was the tiebreaker. And after days of anguish, sleepless nights, and conversations with everyone from her mother to former coaches, she made her decision. She chose the WNBA. Not because the money was better. It wasn't. Not because the league had earned it. They hadn't. But because walking away felt like giving up on every player who couldn't leave. Every woman fighting for roster spots. Every young girl who dreamed of playing professional basketball in America. If we all leave, she said, the WNBA collapses. And when it does, what happens to the other 100 players who weren't invited to this new league? What happens to the infrastructure we spent decades building? What happens to the dream? Her voice cracked. We stay. We fight. We force them to do better. Because if we don't, who will? It was the speech that changed everything. By Monday, 11 of the 15 players had accepted the improved WNBA qualifying offers. The Shadow League? It collapsed before it even launched. The billionaire moved on to other investments. The moment passed. And Breanna Stewart? She released a statement taking credit for the improved offers. Claimed her strategy had worked all along. That the pressure from Unrivaled had forced the WNBA's hand. that her leadership had delivered exactly what players needed. The audacity was stunning. But the damage to her reputation was permanent, because everyone knew the truth. The WNBA hadn't improved their offers because of Stewart's leadership. They'd improved them because they were terrified of losing their stars entirely. Stewart didn't outmaneuver the league. She nearly destroyed the union. Her conflict of interest, her competing priorities, her inability to separate business from advocacy, it had all created the chaos that almost killed women's professional basketball in America. Aya Wilson saved it. Not by being the loudest voice. Not by owning competing leagues. Not by playing politics. By being willing to sacrifice personal gain for collective good. That's leadership. And as free agency finally, mercifully moved forward, one thing became crystal clear. The WNBA players hadn't won this negotiation, but they'd survived it. Barely. And survival, in this case, might have been the greatest victory they could hope for. The question now is simple. What happens next season when these same tensions resurface? When the improved contracts still don't feel like enough? When Unrivaled keeps growing and the conflict of interest remains unresolved? Because this wasn't an ending. This was just the beginning of a war that will define women's basketball for the next decade. And you can bet we'll be watching every single move.